Hey, my name is Doug Enaa. I'm a member of the Kasama Project and the author of a to-be-published book on the French insurrectionary communist Louis-Auguste Blanqui, which will probably be available, I would assume, next year. I can't give you a date. And I'm also a firm and unapologetic advocate of the necessity of a dictatorship of the proletariat. To deny the necessity of that dictatorship is to renounce the conquest of power, and to leave power in the hands of those who wield it, the exploiting capitalist class. And without the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat, you cannot create a society that provides for human needs and allows for the full development of humanity. Yet, it is not enough for communists to be able to win power, although that is absolutely necessary, but communists also need to think sincerely and seriously on the question, how exactly do we rule? How do we make a revolution that lasts? What are some of the challenges and obstacles that we face in developing a society that is democratic and egalitarian, which overcomes the inequalities and defects of capitalism? What type of institutions and decision-making bodies do we need? Is direct democracy an answer to these problems? What are its limitations? In general, what challenges, obstacles, and dangers do we face as we build a new order that is truly revolutionary, representative of the masses, can last, and can rule? I'd like to begin by briefly outlining some of the problems which workers confront under capitalist society. Capitalism is both a social relation and a process, whereby an alien force dominates labor power and its continual reproduction. Labor power is thus marked as a commodity when it is subordinated to capital for the creation of value and profit. For capitalism, the fundamental operating drive is not the satisfaction of human needs, but the accumulation for profit and the enrichment of the capitalist class. The separation of workers from control over their own destiny and subordination to the rule of capital is not enforced strictly economically, but also politically via the state. For Marxists, the state is not some kind of neutral apparatus standing above classes. It does not serve the population impartially. It is not accountable to the common people, even in the most democratic republic. The state is an instrument of class rule and repression. The state seeks to maintain and defend bourgeois class domination and exploitation, while holding down the oppressed classes that potentially threaten to overturn that system. As Lenin says, and I quote, "Democracy for an insignificant minority, democracy for the rich, that is the democracy of capitalist society." If we look more closely into the machinery of capitalist democracy, we see everywhere, in the supposedly petty details of the suffrage, the residential qualifications, exclusion of women, etc., in the technique of the representative institutions, and the actual obstacles to the right of assembly, public buildings are not for paupers. In the purely capitalist organization of the daily press, etc., we see restriction after restriction upon democracy. These restrictions, exceptions, exclusions, obstacles for the poor might seem slight, especially in the eyes of one who has never known want for himself and has never been in close contact with the oppressed classes in their mass life. And 9 out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, bourgeois politicists and politicians come under this category. But in their sum total, these restrictions exclude and squeeze out the poor from politics, from active participation in democracy, end quote. Communists of many different currents have proclaimed in theory that breaking with capitalism and establishing the rule of the proletariat and the oppressed classes means a break with the limits of capitalist representative democracy and establishing a form of participatory democracy modeled after the Paris Commune of 1871 and placing the working class in full control. What is upheld from the Commune are its many progressive features, such as the Commune fused legislative and executive functions of government, which made officials more sensitive to the needs of those who were representative and was more capable of checking and coordinating their administrative functions with the process of production. Furthermore, the source of power was to be the people in arms, not an armed body standing opposed to the people. Direct democracy of this sort of worker control is also to be extended into the factories and other areas of life that would abolish the law of value and place social needs first, leading to the establishment of a socialist society. Yet it is in the passage from theory to practice that things become more difficult and challenging, as we can observe from the subsequent history of communist revolutions. The Commune only lasted 2 months and could only prefigure some of the later complexities that come from making a revolution that can not only rule securely and set up institutions to serve the masses and endure for the long haul, We know that on the morrow of a revolutionary seizure of power, it will not be possible to do away with the law of value at a single stroke. This idea is an utter fantasy with no basis whatsoever in reality. Yet a socialist state can begin to end the dominance of the rule of the law of value in capitalism in both the economy and society. This begins with despotic inroads on the supposed rights of private property of the bourgeoisie, taking from the ruling class the key links of the economy and placing them under the control of the proletariat, thereby restricting the commodity monetary relations, denying the freedom of the class enemy both to enslave and to exploit, without apology, without just as necessity. Here, communist line in leadership must be in command, a command that is consciously directing and transforming society with the aim of overcoming the divisions, defects, and inequalities of class rule. This means that over a long transition period, the law of value subordinates to the planned creation of use values and the building and creation of a new communist society. And here I emphasize the construction of a communist society is not mainly or solely a question of direct workers' control, albeit very important, or direct democracy in general. But it is a question of what is occurring in society overall. How are social relations produced in their totality? For instance, political control over society must necessarily be more representational than control over the workplace. The forms of control utilized in both cases will not be the same. In the example of the workplace, there will undoubtedly be decisions which can be voted on at the shop floor by the workers concerned. For instance, cleaning the bathroom, whether to use an air conditioner, the length of breaks, and we could go on and on. Yet once we have to make complex decisions that affect society as a whole, such as establishing a central planning system, this cannot necessarily be decided and evaluated by the people directly. If you are setting up a planned economy for, say, the United States or any country where there are a multitude of decisions which need to be made, what are the planning priorities? How much to spend? How much should wages rise? How is foreign trade to be determined? What about the Army? Various forms of representation and decision-making bodies are necessarily needed. To give an example, if workers want to develop a major project, say a new form of the Tennessee Valley Authority, this raises a number of questions such as, who is involved in deciding? Is it just the workers who are building the Tennessee Valley Authority? The people in the surrounding communities? Do the people vote by plebiscite? All of them? Do they hold daily meetings in their factories? Who will determine the cost of the project, gain the necessary funding, and evaluate the potential impact of the project? What if the project is destructive to the environment, but the workers in the area just don't care or don't know enough to evaluate the impact? Let us take another example, the Army. As proven by history, every socialist state needs an army to defend itself from both hostile capitalist powers and internal counter-revolutionary subversion. The Army will need to be provided for, maintained, and deployed. How are its decisions to be determined? Is it done publicly? Should troop movements be voted upon? And if voted upon, then by whom? The socialists concerned, the surrounding community, the workers in the surrounding community, or society as a whole? Is there not some need for a military command and a political authority that acts in this instance? Should troop movements or weaknesses in the military be aired publicly so the class enemy is aware of our weaknesses? And how do we know for a fact that people will make the best decisions for themselves by a vote? If you were to ask a majority in the South of the United States to vote on the teaching of evolution in schools, what answer do you think you would receive? Or what if they voted to enact racist laws? Should we really give a shit if such reactionary things are legitimized by a vote? To take the case of the Paris Commune, most of France actually didn't vote for it. They were either neutral or voted for the reactionaries at Versailles. In Germany in 1919, to take another example, following the First World War, most people either voted for conservative parties or the Social Democrats, who supported the slaughter of World War I and proudly murdered revolutionary communists in the streets. It seems that if we are making a series of assumptions that the people just instinctively know all they need to know about complex decisions and social reality and can never vote against their class interests or their interests in general. Well, the simple truth is that people don't necessarily know, although they can, and that they can and have voted against their interests. And frankly, there are times when the majority is wrong and the minority is right. Thus, the question of ruling and changing society becomes much more complicated than simply saying direct democracy is the solution. In fact, such direct control in the case of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Army, are other large social decisions, so that direct democracy in this sense is an illusion, and that something else is needed. What I am getting at is that democracy, debate, accountability, and decision-making under socialism has historically been, and the future will be, mediated by various forms of representation, accountable decision-making bodies, leadership, and political parties. For one thing, the masses do not possess the same political understanding, and there are lags in their consciousness from the very advanced to the intermediate to the backward. When the people take ownership of society, they will do so in unorganized and utterly chaotic ways. That's just reality. They will need to experiment, to go through many learning processes to determine what forms of representation and rule will work for them. And in going through the process of revolution and change, the people will develop political lines, leadership, understanding, skills, etc., which in turn will be mediated through their parties, organizations, leaderships, direct democratic bodies, and representational bodies. And these lines will contend and clash with one another, since not everyone is going to agree all at once. It will take time to implement new forms which have been developed by the advanced masses. For instance, in revolutions, there are advanced masses, cadre, and leaders who have gone through the process of struggle and revolutionary development. They may be concentrated in particular factories or locales, and innovate with bold new forms of worker control, ways of operating, and revolutionize their lives in a profound manner. Now, if we were just to let those advanced workers implement those measures at the level of the factory where they work directly, they would no doubt vote for them. But what about the rest of society? This is where things are mediated. Advanced workers and revolutionaries may need to leave their places of work to spread the revolution, investigate conditions, join a military force, or to exercise leadership and power in unfamiliar terrain. For revolutionary change does not just happen at the factory level, but throughout all of society, in its totality. And if we don't have a process or a way to mediate that change, we may as well give up on communism. So what I'm ultimately saying is that we'll need leadership and representation after the revolution, along with various forms of direct democracy. These forms of representation will need to be accountable, encourage mass debate and input, transparency to the extent feasible and possible, and create a more democratic society than capitalism, but able to make decisions which can lead the whole society on the road to communism. However, this does not mean that various forms of representation be considered set in stone, but are open for development and change in order to better serve the people. And none of this is meant to say that there isn't a danger of substitutionalism, usurpation, and the many varied problems of representation in general. Those problems exist. Yet that is part of the danger and opportunity of power and communist politics. We cannot simply come up with a formal solution that overcomes this danger. Direct democracy in and of itself is not the answer, since it can be manipulated and cannot make changes to a complex society as a whole. Societal transformation, by its very nature, is mediated, and we can only come up with solutions in the concrete, in the living moments of struggle which are tried and tested. These are problems which we cannot walk around, but we need to struggle through them. And I believe that if we were willing to do so, we can build a revolution which lasts and leads to the flourishing of communism. Thank you.
All right. Okay, well,